Let me ask you something real, and I mean deep, soul-level real. Have you ever poured yourself into someone only to be met with silence, confusion, or indifference? Have you ever bent over backward to prove your worth, only to feel invisible? The second you stopped performing, most of us have. And let me tell you the truth, they don't teach you in romantic comedies or TikTok advice clips. The most powerful move you'll ever make in love doesn't come with noise. It comes with silence. Now, I know what you've been told. You've been conditioned to believe that love means proving yourself, that when they pull away, you chase, that if they stop texting, you double down. That silence is weakness. That distance means failure. But what if that's all a lie? What if the real strength, the kind that transforms your entire life, is found not in chasing, but in vanishing? Let's break that myth right now. Because this isn't about being cold. This isn't about being manipulative. It's about reclaiming your emotional autonomy. It's about shifting from reactive to reflective, from emotional chaos to stoic clarity, from being predictable to becoming unforgettable. In this video, I'm going to show you the strategy that will not only break their perception of control, but also elevate your sense of peace, presence, and power. Think about it. How often do you find yourself hovering over your phone, wondering whether to reach out first, replaying every last conversation, crafting the perfect message that might fix what they broke? What if the most effective message is the one you never send? This is not about games. This is about stoic relationships, a different breed entirely. The kind that refuses to beg, that doesn't bend to chaos, that doesn't chase validation. Because when you stop trying to be heard by someone who stopped listening, that's not silence, that's strategy. So let me be brutally honest with you. The reason they keep winning, the reason they stay so calm while you spiral, is because they expect the noise, they expect the apology, they expect the text, and when none of it comes, that's when everything inside them starts to break. In this powerful, deeply emotional breakdown, you'll learn exactly why no texts, no calls is not about punishment, but about becoming a question they can't stop asking. We're not here for revenge, we're here for stoicism, for clarity, for transformation. This isn't a comeback, this is a resurrection, so buckle up, because what's coming next, it's not just a mindset shift, it's a full identity shift. And once you learn how to disappear with intention, not out of fear but out of power, you'll never respond the same way again. You'll never beg again. You'll never chase crumbs again. You're not just walking away. You're evolving. And the version of you they used to manipulate, she's already gone, ready to see what happens when your silence becomes the loudest sound in their life. Stay with me, because once you understand this, they'll never see you the same way again. 1. The disappearance they never expected. They expected noise. They expected the meltdown. They expected the 2 a.m. text, the emotional voicemail, the paragraph that begged for understanding or closure. But instead, they got silence, complete, calculated, cold-blooded silence, and not the kind that feels passive or confused. This silence was intentional, like a door closing without a creak, a performance ending with no final bow, a signal going dead with no warning. You see, people aren't afraid of arguments. They aren't shaken by emotional explosions, because those are still signs of attachment. Anger means access, tears mean relevance, even hurt feelings validate the ego of the one who caused the pain. But when you do something they never anticipated, when you vanish without noise, without effort, without a trace, it doesn't just confuse them, it shakes them to the core. Why? Because it breaks the pattern. It destroys their internal script. They had your behavior mapped out. They were ready for you to beg, to chase, to explain. That's what you always did, right? But now you've rewritten the entire dynamic. You've become the magician who walked off stage. before pulling the final rabbit out of the hat. And they're still staring at the empty top hat, waiting, wondering, obsessing. Not because you told them anything, but because you told them nothing. And that, my friend, is when the spiral begins, because in the absence of your words, their mind becomes their worst enemy. They start asking questions they don't have. The maturity to answer. Did she really stop caring? Why isn't she reacting? Is she already with someone else? They refresh their messages. Nothing. They check your page. Quiet. They watch your stories. You're gone. Not just online, but energetically, spiritually. You're unavailable now in a way they can't explain. And that's the power of this move. You didn't yell. You didn't block. You didn't announce your departure with drama. You simply disappeared. Not to prove anything, but because you realized that saying anything would be like writing poetry for someone who only ever skimmed your soul. This is the moment they realize access has been revoked. And when you take away access from someone who relied on your reactions for their sense of control, you're not just giving silence, you're giving psychological disruption. You've become unreadable, you've become a mystery, you've become the very question they can't stop asking. Think about this. When someone drops their phone in water, they don't panic immediately. At first, they assume it'll work. They wipe it down, hit the buttons, shake it a little, but then nothing happens, no response, no vibration, no signal. And that's when the panic sets in, not because the phone made a sound, but because it didn't. Your silence is like that now, a realization that the thing they thought would always respond doesn't anymore. And here's where the Stoic mindset kicks in. In Stoicism, power isn't demonstrated by how loud you can be. It's revealed in how unmoved you remain in the face of chaos. You don't have to scream to be strong. You don't need to react to be powerful. Your calm detachment is your revenge. Your discipline is your transformation. And when you vanish, truly vanish, not to bait them back in, but to reclaim yourself, that's not avoidance. That's self-respect. That's the turning point. That's where you go from being the emotional crutch they used to the absence they can't stop craving. And let's be real, this doesn't feel easy. The urge to check on them will hit. The temptation to send a subtle "hope you're okay" will burn your fingertips. But each time you choose silence over impulse, you grow stronger. Each moment you don't react becomes a declaration of your value. You're not doing this to play games. You're doing this because you finally realized the game was rigged. You gave your heart to someone who fed on your vulnerability, who assumed your empathy was infinite, who confused your compassion with compliance. And now that you've gone silent, they're forced to face themselves for the first time without your emotional labor to distract them. In Stoic relationships, absence is not neglect, it's preservation, it's boundary, it's healing. They thought you were the one who needed them, but now they're realizing they were the ones addicted to your presence, your patterns, your softness. And without it, their world starts to lose shape. They look calm on the outside. Sure, they laugh, they post, they pretend. But internally, the storm is growing. Because silence creates a space where guilt, regret, and reflection have nowhere to hide. That's why your disappearance hits harder than any angry word ever could. It doesn't give them something to push back on. It gives them a mirror. And most people don't fear being left behind. They fear being forgotten. And when you disappear, without explanation, they don't know if they've been forgotten or simply replaced. And that uncertainty, it destroys them. Because the human mind doesn't obsess over closure, it obsesses over loose ends. And that's exactly what you've become. A thread they can't tie off, a book with the last chapter missing, a song that cuts off before the final note. And now, every time their phone buzzes, they hope it's you. Every story they post is bait, every laugh is a plea. Please react. Please remind me I still matter to you. But you don't. Because your silence has become sacred. You don't respond, not because you're cold, but because you've evolved, because you finally see your peace as something too expensive to spend on someone who never protected it. And that silence, it becomes your power, it becomes your shield, it becomes the loudest message you never had to say. And they hear it every time they scroll, every time they lie awake, wondering if you're thinking of them, every time they remember the old version of you who would have come running by now. That version is gone. She's been replaced by someone stoic, someone solid, someone silent. And it's that silence, not rage, not revenge, that will haunt them forever. 2. You become the cliffhanger. Their mind can't close. When a story ends, it usually gives you something: resolution, closure, a clean break, even if it's painful. But what happens when the story just stops without warning? When the screen fades to black mid-sentence, mid-scene, mid-emotion? That's what you've become to them now. Not the dramatic finale they braced for, but the cliffhanger they'll never be able to finish. And that cliffhanger doesn't just leave them curious, it consumes them. Because people don't crave closure, they crave certainty. And when you don't text, when you don't explain, when you don't react, you deny them the ability to label the experience, to reduce it into something they can comfortably file away. Instead, you become a mystery, one that keeps replaying in their mind on a loop. And the more they try to explain it to themselves, the less sense it makes. Because here's the truth: they were counting on your predictability. They relied on it. They knew how to get a rise out of you. They knew how to pull just hard enough to make you chase. They knew that if they distanced themselves, you'd close the gap. But not this time. This time you did something they didn't plan for. You vanished, and not in bitterness, but in strength, in stillness, in complete composure. And now they're obsessed. Not with you, at least not at first, but with the absence of you. The you that used to answer within seconds. The you that used to forgive without hesitation. The you that used to fold your boundaries for a breadcrumb of their affection. And that version is nowhere to be found. That's the hook. That's what keeps them checking their phone, stalking your stories, replaying conversations in their head, trying to spot the moment they lost control. Because in Stoic relationships, there's no grand declaration of detachment. There's only the slow, painful realization that access has been revoked, not loudly, but permanently. They aren't just losing you, they're losing the mirror you once held up for them, the mirror that let them feel powerful, wanted, needed. And without it, they're left staring at a distorted reflection they don't recognize. It hits them in the quiet moments, not when they're out with friends or posting curated smiles, but when they're alone with their thoughts. That's when it creeps in. That's when the cliffhanger starts to haunt them. Why didn't she fight? Why didn't she explain? Did she ever even care? Was I just replaceable? These aren't just passing questions. They become obsessions, because the human mind is addicted to unfinished business. And you, without saying a word, became the emotional, unfinished business they'll never escape. Not because you're playing games, but because you stopped playing altogether. You refused to give them the ending they thought they deserved. You didn't tie a bow on the breakup. You didn't give them the dignity of a neat conclusion. And in that silence, you delivered something far more powerful than words: consequence. See, when you give closure, you give comfort. You give the other person the ability to walk away with clarity. But when you walk away with mystery, when you leave without the text, without the tearful voicemail, without the quote-filled post that screams, "Look at me, I'm healing," you give them nothing but the echo of their own choices. And echoes don't lie. They can distract themselves with other people. They can try to replace the feeling. They can post new photos, flirt with someone else, pretend they've moved on. But that cliffhanger, it follows them. It sneaks into their sleep. It colors every new connection with doubt, because when someone becomes a question you can't answer, they stop being a person and start being a presence. You're not just gone, you're an emotional riddle. You're the missing puzzle piece, and that silence, that gaping lack of explanation, is louder than any angry conversation ever could be. That's the power of stoicism in relationships. It's not reactive, it's not dramatic. It doesn't explode. It dissolves quietly, fully, unapologetically. And that's exactly why it leaves such a deep mark. They underestimated you. They thought you'd scream, cry, beg, plead, perform. But what you did, you gave them the one ending they never saw coming. No ending at all. And now every time they hear your name, see something that reminds them of you, or scroll past a place you used to go together, the story starts again in their mind. Only this time, they can't finish it. They can't find the moral. They can't make themselves the hero. All they have is an empty page where your explanation used to be. And here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They're not just confused, they're terrified, because if someone like you can go silent, stay silent, without looking back, then that means you were stronger than they thought, stronger than they gave you credit for, stronger than their ego was prepared to face. And in that realization, the regret begins. Not because of what they lost, but because they never truly understood what they had. And the cliffhanger you left behind, that's their punishment, that's their mirror, that's their unraveling. You don't need to say anything. You already said everything the moment you chose not to. And if you're sitting here watching this, nodding along, feeling that quiet fire rise in your chest because you know you've done it, you've walked away, stayed silent, and never looked back, then you already understand the power in becoming a question they can't answer. And if you're just stepping into this mindset for the first time, wondering if it's too late to vanish, let me tell you, it's never too late to go silent with grace. Not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. And once you choose that silence, once you make peace with the unfinished story, it becomes the beginning of your own. And that new story, it won't be about chasing or explaining. It'll be about building, reclaiming, evolving. If this message speaks to your soul, if you feel that shift happening in real time, I want you to do something simple right now. Hit like and comment number 1 if you're claiming this moment as your power move. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, because what's coming next, it's going to show you how silence doesn't just make you unforgettable, it makes you undeniable. 3. Silence as psychological dominance. Power is never what it seems. It's not always loud, visible, or dramatic. In fact, true power often comes cloaked in stillness, in the refusal to react, in the discipline to remain unmoved. That is the secret most people never learn. They spend their energy explaining themselves, defending their worth, chasing after those who never once stopped to consider what it cost them to keep showing up. But once you step into your stoicism, once you stop arguing for your value, you begin to command a kind of psychological gravity they can't escape. Silence is not just a boundary, it is a weapon, not because it harms, but because it disarms. When someone expects you to cry, plead, or scream, and instead you meet them with complete, unwavering quiet, they don't know what to do with that. They lose their script. They start spiraling not because you said too much, but because you said absolutely nothing. You see, your words were their control panel. Every message you sent, every reaction you gave was data. It told them you still cared. It told them they still had power over you. But silence breaks that feedback loop. It starves them of certainty. And people don't just fear losing you. They fear losing access to the version of themselves they could only maintain in your presence. That version, the one who felt in charge, admired, desired, admired, that version depended on your validation to exist. And now you're gone. And so is their illusion of superiority. That's what makes Stoic relationships so psychologically intense. They strip away the performance and leave only truth. They don't survive on noise. They thrive in self-control, in restraint, in intention. So when you choose not to reply, not because you're bitter, but because you're building, there's nothing more terrifying to someone who thought they owned your attention. Imagine this. They pick up their phone expecting the usual damage. Control, but nothing's there. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever again. And slowly it dawns on them that you've stopped playing the game, and the rules they once used to manipulate you no longer apply. Now their thoughts become obsessive, their questions spiral. Why isn't she reacting? What is she thinking? Did I lose her for good? Because when you stop handing them emotional cues, you force them to deal with themselves. Your silence becomes a mirror they can't avoid. Every time they refresh your page and find no new posts, every time they check their messages and find no new texts, every time they scan their stories hoping for a view from you and find none, the silence gets louder, it grows teeth, it crawls into the corners of their ego and tears away the mask they wore so confidently, because your absence isn't just absence, it's dominance. And here's what's wild. They'll try to reframe the narrative. They'll convince themselves that you're just playing hard to get, that you're trying to manipulate them, that eventually you'll come back. Because it's easier to believe you're being petty than to believe you're genuinely gone. But as days become weeks and weeks become months, that story starts to crumble. Because you're not just silent, you're consistent. You're not just distant, you're unreachable. And that kind of self-control, that kind of emotional composure, it can't be faked, it can't be pretended. It only comes from one place: real growth. You're no longer seeking closure. You're no longer rehearsing explanations in your head. You're no longer waiting for the right moment to speak your piece, because you've already made peace with yourself. And in doing that, you've reclaimed your authority. Authority over your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own future. They used to think they had you wrapped around their finger, didn't they? That no matter how cold they acted, how distant they became, how carelessly they treated your heart, you'd always come back. But when you chose silence, you shattered that fantasy. And now, without your attention to prop up their ego, they begin to unravel. They begin to doubt themselves. They begin to feel powerless. And here's the part they didn't expect. Your silence isn't passive, it's purposeful. You didn't vanish because you couldn't handle it. You disappeared because you finally saw the truth. That the more you engage with someone who devalues you, the more you train them to see your worth as negotiable. And you're done with that. You're not withholding communication to prove a point. You're simply not giving it where it isn't honored. And that, ironically, is the most powerful message you'll ever send. You become the ghost they can't stop chasing. Not because you haunted them, but because you stopped haunting yourself for the sake of being understood. And this is where Stoicism becomes a superpower. Because while they panic, you prepare. While they question, you evolve. While they scramble for answers, you're building your next chapter. You've finally learned that you don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be dramatic to be remembered. And you definitely don't have to beg to be valued. You've stepped into a version of yourself that no longer performs for approval. You've chosen power over validation, stillness over noise, peace over proving. And that shift, that energetic recalibration, it doesn't just affect them, it elevates you. You start to notice that your focus sharpens, your spirit feels lighter, your space becomes sacred. And anyone who comes into your life now, romantically, emotionally, or even professionally, has to meet a new standard. Because silence didn't just protect you, it refined you. And the world begins to respond to that refinement. Opportunities align, peace returns, and without even trying to prove your growth, you radiate it. And here's the final truth they'll have to swallow. The reason they're still thinking about you long after you've gone silent is because the version of you they once knew doesn't exist anymore. And every time they try to reach out, whether they do it or not, they're reaching for a memory of the person who used to answer, who used to break, who used to beg. And that person, she's gone, replaced not by bitterness, but by brilliance, by strength, by stoic clarity, by an unbothered confidence that doesn't announce itself, but is felt in every room it enters. So let them wonder, let them Sit with the silence. Let them feel the weight of your absence. Because in that space where your reactions used to live, your power is finally breathing, fully, freely, fiercely. And once you master that kind of silence, not out of fear, but from self-command, you become someone unforgettable. Not because you shouted, not because you pleaded, but because you chose silence. And silence, when wielded correctly, isn't retreat, it's reign. For they thought you'd break, but you vanished. They thought they knew you, thought they'd seen the whole play before. Same cast, same script, same ending. You get hurt, you cry, you reach out, you text something emotional and raw that they half read, half ignore. You wait by your phone, heart pounding at every buzz, praying it's them. You overthink, you replay conversations, you try to find the one sentence you could have said differently to keep them from drifting. That's what they expected. That was the role they wrote for you, and they were confident you'd stick to it. Why wouldn't you? You always did before, you always gave in, always forgave, always explained, always fought for the connection, even when you were the only one bleeding for it. But not this time. This time, something in you shifted. Something snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. You didn't send a goodbye message. You didn't post a passive-aggressive quote. You didn't block them to get a reaction. You didn't beg them to understand what they never made an effort to hear. You simply disappeared. Quietly, completely, without theatrics, without warning, and that is what they never saw coming. Because they weren't afraid of losing you. They were afraid of losing their grip on you. And when you vanished, not to hurt them, but to heal you, you stole their power without a fight, without a word, without a trace. That's the moment they realized something was different. Because anger would have meant you cared. A meltdown would have reassured them they still had emotional leverage. Even a bitter text would have said, "I still feel something." But your silence said it all. It said, "I've left the arena. I'm not swinging anymore. I'm not even watching." And suddenly they're standing there with their fists up, ready for a battle that's already over. Do you feel that? That inner shift, that deep, almost spiritual steadiness that rises when you finally realize you no longer need to be heard by people who never listened. That's what real detachment feels like. That's stoicism, not coldness, not numbness, but a radical form of emotional discipline. You're not ghosting, you're not punishing, you're just done giving people a front row seat to your vulnerability when all they did was critique your performance. You vanished because there's nothing left to say, and that silence, it's louder than any monologue. It's the kind of silence that echoes, that lingers, that gets under their skin, because it wasn't what they prepared for, it wasn't in the playbook. And now they're confused, agitated, checking their phone, wondering if something's wrong with yours, wondering why it's taking you so long to come to your senses. But this isn't confusion on your part. This is confidence. This is peace. This is emotional freedom. And here's the brutal truth. They didn't think you had it in you. They thought your softness meant weakness. They thought your loyalty meant dependence. They thought your love made you theirs. But love, real love, is not about submission. It's about presence. And when your presence is no longer a gift they can access at will, they realize what they've truly lost. It's not just you. It's their ability to feel wanted through you. Their ability to test your limits without consequence. Their ability to rely on your reactions to regulate their own sense of importance. Now they're left with themselves. And trust me, that's not a pretty place to be. Because when you vanish without drama, you hand them the one thing they can't handle: accountability. You don't need to yell to make them feel regret. Your silence is a mirror. It reflects everything they refused to confront when they had your attention. And let's be honest, they'll try to pretend. Oh, they'll act like it doesn't bother them. They'll post like they're unbothered, laugh a little louder, party a little harder, make it look like they're living their best life. But every fake laugh is a plea. Every post is a bait. Every smile is a question. Do you see me yet? Will you react? But you don't. You're not playing that game. You've transcended the dynamic. You're no longer the character they expected you to be. You rewrote your role. You stopped being the one who breaks under pressure. Now you're the one who walks away without saying a word. And that silence shatters them, because the mind doesn't fear explosions. It fears emptiness. It fears the absence of noise where it expected chaos. And now, all they're left with is that silence. The one you chose, the one you stand in, the one that says, you no longer have access to me. And maybe you're wondering, do they even care? Are they even thinking about me? Let me be clear. They do, but not the way you think. Not in reflection, in regret, not in love, in loss. They don't miss what they understood. They miss what they didn't finish, what they didn't close, what they didn't get to define. That's what keeps them up at night. That's what makes your silence powerful. You didn't just walk away. You left unanswered. And unanswered people spiral. They build stories. They create fantasy versions of what could have happened, but nothing they imagine will soothe them, because what they're missing isn't the relationship, it's the control. And now that you've broken that cycle, you've become more powerful than ever. Your absence isn't a space they can fill. It's a reminder they can't outrun. It shows up when they least expect it. A song, a scent, a phrase, a place. You haunt their subconscious not because you said so much, but because you finally stopped saying anything. And now, they're chasing closure in conversations with themselves. Conversations you'll never respond to because you're not coming back. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself more. You're not ignoring them. You're protecting your energy. You're not trying to win. You've already won because you walked away whole. Let that sink in. You walked away whole. They can't say the same. They're still fragmented, still looking for answers that won't come, still trying to unlock a door you already closed and locked and walked away from with the key in your pocket and your peace intact. If that resonates with you, if you feel yourself stepping into that kind of strength, like this video and comment number 1 below to claim it. Show them, show yourself that this time you didn't break, you vanished. And if you're not already subscribed, do it now, because what comes next, it's not just healing, it's transformation. 5. The mirror starts to hurt more than the loss. At first they feel nothing, or so they think. When you go quiet, vanish without drama, and choose to stop explaining yourself, their initial reaction isn't panic, it's ego, it's denial. They tell themselves you're just trying to get a reaction, that you'll be back. They convince themselves that your silence is temporary, that it's just another phase in your emotional pattern, because that's what the old version of you would have done, right? Go quiet for a day or two, maybe even a week, but eventually, inevitably, you'd reach out looking for clarity, peace, answers. But something's different this time. Something's colder, still, heavier. And even if they can't quite name it yet, they start to feel it. Not because you told them anything, but because for the first time, you didn't. No message, no closure, no need to be understood. And that void doesn't just leave them confused, it leaves them vulnerable. Because without your noise, all they have left is the echo of their own actions. And that echo, it's brutal. It repeats the things they said when you were still trying. It replays the moments they ignored your needs, the way they downplayed your pain, the way they leaned on your love like it was oxygen, without ever once acknowledging how much it cost you to keep giving. And now they look in the mirror, and it's not you they see, it's themselves, their reflection, stripped of your emotional labor, stripped of your forgiveness, stripped of the excuses they used to justify their behavior. And that mirror hurts more than losing you ever did, because losing you was something they thought they could bounce back from, something they assumed they could control. But facing themselves, seeing the truth of how they showed up or didn't show up, is a kind of pain they weren't ready for. Because when you stop performing, when you stop being the one who absorbs the damage and keeps the connection alive, the spotlight shifts and it shines right on them. And this is where Stoicism reveals its most powerful effect, not in how it affects others directly, but in how it forces them to confront what they've been avoiding. You're not being cold, you're being clear, you're not punishing, you're protecting, and they're not angry because you're gone. They're unraveling because they're finally seeing themselves without the buffer of your love. And love, when it's real, reflects. It holds up a mirror to the other person. It shows them who they are. And when that mirror disappears, they can't hide behind it anymore. Now they're left sitting in the ruins of a dynamic they destroyed, but never thought would end. They go about their day like normal. Work, friends, pretending, but it hits them in the quiet, in the still moments, in the pauses between conversations when their mind drifts back to you and the silence you left behind. And in that silence, they don't hear your voice. They hear their own, the excuses, the indifference, the moments you needed more and they gave you less. And that's what breaks them, not the absence, the reflection. Because people can survive breakups, they can move on from arguments. But it's much harder to move on from regret. And regret doesn't scream, it whispers, it creeps in slowly. First as a question, did I mess that up? Then as a reality, I did. And that reality follows them like a shadow. They check your stories, still nothing. They go to message you and stop mid-sentence. What do they even say? What can they say now that the version of you who would have responded is gone? The you who once stayed up waiting for their reply. The you who forgave too quickly, who softened too easily. That you is out of reach, replaced by someone quieter, stronger, and that strength terrifies them because it's not loud, it's not flashy, it's grounded, calm, and completely uninterested in revisiting the chaos. That's the thing about Stoic relationships. They don't end with explosions. They dissolve in self-respect. And when someone realizes they've lost not just your presence but your belief in them, that's when the breakdown begins. Not the crying kind. The kind that happens in silence, in solitude, in those 2 a.m. moments when their confidence fails them. And they start to ask the questions they avoided for so long. Why didn't I try harder? Why didn't I listen when she said she was tired? Why did I wait until she was gone to understand what she gave me? But by then your silence has become a permanent fixture in their mind. Not a wall, not a door, not a message, but an absence. A presence through non-presence. A quiet reminder that they were never as in control as they believed. And they realized something devastating. They didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves who only existed when you were still believing in their potential. And now, without your belief, without your love to soften the hard edges of their character, they're left exposed, raw, defenseless. They see themselves not as they pretended to be, but as they truly are. And that sight is more painful than anything you could have said, because they finally understand you weren't the one who was broken. You were the one who stayed whole while carrying both your wounds and theirs. And now that you've stopped carrying it, they feel the full weight of their own flaws. That's what Stoicism does. It doesn't fight for understanding. It creates space for truth. It doesn't manipulate, it mirrors. And once someone sees the truth in that silence, they can never unsee it. They don't hate you. They hate what they see when you're no longer there to validate them. And they'll never tell you that. They'll act like they're fine. They'll try to move on. But everything feels duller now. Every new connection is a little emptier because no one else knows the parts of them you held with such care, and no one else will, because they'll never be that vulnerable again. You brought something out in them they didn't know how to honor, and now that it's gone, they're not just grieving you, they're grieving the version of themselves they lost when you left. And you're finally free. Not because you won anything, but because you no longer need anything from them. You don't need apologies. You don't need clarity. You don't even need them to understand, because you understand. You see clearly now that your silence is not revenge. It's revelation. You've revealed who they are by removing the mirror. And that truth will echo in their life long after you've moved on. And when people ask about you, they'll say you disappeared, that you just stopped responding, that you went cold. But you and I both know the truth. You didn't go cold. You just stopped burning yourself out trying to keep someone else warm. You didn't disappear. You just returned to yourself, fully, finally, fiercely. And the mirror they now face? It won't shatter. It will stay. Every time they try to love someone new without having healed, every time they repeat the same patterns hoping for a different result, every time they remember the one who saw them fully and still tried anyway, that reflection is forever, and it will always begin with your silence. 6. You evolve, they obsess. Something happens when you go quiet, not because you're hurt, but because you're healing. Not to get attention, but because you've outgrown the need to explain. Not to win someone back, but because you finally understood that your power lies in not chasing what devalues your worth. This is the turning point, the silent, subtle, and permanent shift from being reactive to being sovereign. And as you evolve, something else unfolds in the background, something they never expected: obsession. At first, they felt relieved, free. They told themselves the silence meant victory, that your stillness was surrender, that your quiet meant you were just buying time before crawling back. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing, no message, no "I miss you," no response to the bait they left in stories, captions, or online presence. You didn't take the hook. You didn't even glance at the line. And slowly, without realizing it, they began to unravel, because their control depended on your response. Their sense of value came from your attention. But now they're living in a loop they can't break. A cycle of questions with no answers. A hunger for closure that they will never be fed, because you've risen above the emotional chaos they used to trap you in. You're no longer performing your pain to be seen. You're not reacting to be heard. You're building a life that speaks without noise. And that silence, it's crushing them. Not because it's a game, but because it reveals the gap between what they believed they controlled and what they actually never had a grip on. You were never weak, you were loyal, you were never needy, you were emotionally generous. You were never obsessed, you were invested, but now that investment has been withdrawn and they're feeling the deficit. Not just of your love, but of your presence, your attention, your softness, your laughter, your belief in them. All the things they thought would always be there, like background music in their life. Suddenly silent, and in that quiet, they're beginning to hear themselves think. For the first time, they're starting to realize how much you held the space, how much you held them up emotionally, how much you made the relationship work when it really should have fallen apart long ago. And now that you're no longer present, the whole structure is collapsing. Stoic relationships are like that. They don't crash with fireworks. They collapse from within once the emotional backbone is removed. And you were the backbone, the glue, the soul. And now that you're gone, they're not just spiraling, they're haunted. Haunted by the absence of your energy, your patience, your effort. Haunted by the memory of how safe it felt to be loved by someone who never asked them to be perfect, but just to be present. And now they can't go back, because you're not where they left you. You've evolved. And that evolution didn't come from their absence. It came from your decision. You decided to stop shrinking. You decided to stop molding yourself into shapes that made them comfortable. You decided to stop being an emotional mirror for someone who refused to face their reflection. And every day you stayed silent, you built something stronger. Yourself. Your clarity, your sense of identity. You started to rebuild the life that existed before they made you question your worth. You stopped checking their feed, stopped wondering if they noticed you were gone, stopped keeping your healing on hold just in case they decided to return, because that door is closed now, not with anger, but with alignment. You're not bitter, you're balanced, you're not hiding, you're protecting peace, you're not punishing, you're prioritizing. And here's the truth that wrecks them the most. You no longer want what they're still hoping you need. And that power, that complete, unapologetic detachment, it doesn't make you heartless. It makes you healed. Because when you evolve, when you truly shift into a new season of self-worth, you don't look back for validation. You don't reopen doors just to prove you can walk out again. You stay gone, not out of vengeance, but out of vision. Because now your life has become something more beautiful than any apology they could ever offer. Something more vibrant than any "I miss you" could ever echo. Your silence has done what 1,000 conversations never could. It's taught them who you are, it's exposed who they were, and it's awakened a version of you that no longer bends. The version that's focused, centered, boundaried, and the version that will never again waste words on someone who never listened when you whispered truth the first time. That's stoicism. That's not indifference. It's self-possession. It's choosing your energy with intention. It's valuing your emotional bandwidth like currency and no longer making donations to people who bankrupt your spirit. And while you rise, while you build, while you get back to the things you once abandoned trying to hold it all together, they watch. Maybe not directly, maybe not through messages or calls, but they're watching. Through silence, through memory, through the ache of their own conscience catching up. And what they see, it terrifies them, because you didn't break, you didn't explode, you didn't collapse. You vanished, quietly, strategically, powerfully. And they realize now, they were never your peace. They were the storm you finally walked out of. And in walking out, you found your calm. And no matter how loud they scream internally now, no matter how long they sit with their regret, no matter how many stories they post or people they talk to or distractions they chase, the truth remains, you're not reachable anymore. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're no longer available for connections that cost your soul. So let them obsess, let them spiral, let them question, because while they chase ghosts, you're living, you're glowing, you're free. And if you feel that truth deep in your soul right now, if you've claimed that kind of quiet evolution, then do this. Hit like, comment #1 to mark the moment you stepped into your power, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because this journey isn't just about silence, it's about resurrection. And your story, it's only getting started. This is where it ends. Not with a dramatic message, not with a desperate call, not with an emotional finale begging to be understood, but with you standing in complete, centered stillness. This is the kind of ending that doesn't scream, doesn't need to be witnessed, doesn't ask for applause. This is the kind of ending that is real, quiet, permanent, and most importantly, liberating. You didn't get the closure you thought you needed because you became the closure. You became the moment the cycle broke, the moment the pattern died, the moment everything shifted, not for them, but for you. And as that shift settles in your bones, you start to realize you've been trying to prove your worth to people who were never qualified to evaluate it. People who were confused by your depth, intimidated by your softness, and completely unequipped to meet the version of love you offered. Not because you were too much, but because they were not enough. Not honest enough, not present enough, not whole enough. And the more you tried to help them become the version of themselves they couldn't even see yet, the more you lost pieces of yourself. But no more. This silence you chose, this distance you now maintain, it isn't about bitterness or avoidance. It's not about punishing someone for not choosing you. It's about choosing yourself in a way that finally feels sacred. Stoicism teaches us that we cannot control others, only ourselves. And when you finally stop fighting to be understood, stop waiting to be seen, stop begging to be chosen, you walk away from the noise and into clarity. That's the walk you're on now, the one where you don't chase closure, you become it. The one where you don't explain your silence, you are the silence, the kind of silence that heals, that clarifies, that recalibrates your entire identity. You've spent so long trying to articulate your pain to someone who refused to listen, trying to get them to feel something for you when they could barely feel for themselves, trying to show them that you were enough when they had already decided that your value was dependent on their convenience. And now you've stopped trying, not because you've given up on love, but because you've stopped offering love to people who only take. You've stopped offering explanations to those who never cared to understand you. You've stopped handing out your energy like it's free when it's been costing you everything. And for the first time in a long time, you can breathe. Not that shallow kind of breath that comes when you're anxiously hoping they'll notice you're missing. No, this is deeper. This is still. This is clean, because this breath doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. It doesn't need to be validated to be valuable. You're not breathing for them anymore. You're breathing for yourself. And in that breath, you start to remember who you were before the chaos, before the gaslighting, before the breadcrumbing, before the cycles that always ended with you apologizing just for wanting more. You remember the girl who didn't question her worth, who laughed without checking if someone was watching, who said what she felt without fear of being labeled too emotional. And now she's back. Not the same version. She's wiser now, sharper, softer in the right places and steel in the rest. She doesn't look for approval anymore. She doesn't wait by the phone. She doesn't negotiate with people who've shown her their care has conditions. She's not angry. She's just no longer available, no longer reachable by the things that once broke her. That's what this silence gave her. That's what Stoicism unlocked. The ability to let go, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to protect what was left of her peace. And here's what no one tells you. When you walk away without closure, you don't walk away empty. You walk away full of the lessons, full of the growth, full of the evidence of your strength. You walk away with the kind of self-respect that can only be built in the absence of validation. And those who took you for granted, they feel it even if they never say it out loud, even if they never reach out again, even if they pretend like you never mattered. They feel the silence you left behind, because people don't miss the noise. They miss the meaning behind it. And you weren't just another person talking. You were truth. You were warmth. You were the reminder that someone could see them at their worst and still choose love, but they didn't recognize the gift, and you're not responsible for making them see it now. You don't have to send a letter. You don't have to create a final post. You don't have to scream your side of the story. You don't even have to tell your friends, because your healing doesn't need an audience. Your peace isn't a performance, it's personal. And the more you hold on to that, the more grounded you become. Because here's the final truth, the one that rewrites everything you thought about endings. Sometimes the most powerful closure is no closure at all. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not needing any. Sometimes the loudest message is silence. Sometimes not explaining yourself is what creates the deepest confusion in others and the clearest confidence in you. And when you get to that place, you stop caring whether they ever regret it. You stop needing them to understand what they lost. You stop hoping for a moment where they come running back to finally say, "I see it now. I see you." Because you see you. Fully, finally. Without distortion, without dependency, without delay. You're not waiting anymore. You're not wondering anymore. You're not holding your breath anymore. You're living. And in that life, there's no space for explanations, only expansion, only alignment. only energy that matches the woman you've become. You are the end of the pattern. You are the break in the cycle. You are the silence that shattered the old story and made space for something extraordinary. And that story, that next chapter, it begins now, with less talking, less justifying, less trying, and more being, more truth, more calm, more clarity, more you. No texts, no calls, just this. The you that evolved beyond the chaos, the you that rose without noise, the you that now walks forward, not hoping to be remembered but knowing you're unforgettable.